Welcome to another episode of This Too Shall Suck podcast, where we talk about the real of grief, the whole grief, and nothing but the grief. Welcome back, my loves. I am your host, Loryn Denise, and I am so happy to have you here. If this is your first time here, welcome. Thank you so much for listening to this season. And if you're listening again, welcome back. Y'all loyal. And thank you so much for continuing to join me on this journey. On today's episode, we're going to be diving into something that I'm sure no one wants to talk about, but y'all keep listening because y'all know grief is real. So I appreciate y'all. But I wanted to talk about suicide, and I wanted to talk about the aftermath of suicide. I think a lot of people, of course, like we put a lot of emphasis on like actual suicide, which I think obviously is important, but I think it's important to think about the aftermath of it. Nobody really talks about that part of it, of the people who you're leaving behind and what that looks like. Because a lot of people talk to the suicide survivors or attempt survivors of suicide. And I don't think, really people talk to the people who are left behind and what that means for them. So I have a friend on who is going to be sharing his journey on the aftermath of suicide. I actually know him because his wife was a friend of mine, and he's a friend of mine, obviously, but she committed suicide, and I'll let him speak more about the story, but she committed suicide earlier this year, and so he's had to kind of live in that space and the aftermath of losing someone to suicide. So I thought it was important to give space and time to the people who are having to live with that grief of it. And then also, this is actually going to be a 2-part episode. I want to give space and time to someone who attempted it and survived it, and, how they're feeling and what they were going through and where they're at now. So, I think it's important. I wanted to give you some statistics. I don't want this first part to be long because I want to give him enough time to be able to share his journey and everything that he's gone through. But I just want to give you a few statistics. The World Health Organization has some statistics about suicide. Nearly 800,000 people die by suicide in the world each year. That's roughly 1 death every 4 seconds. And suicide is the second leading cause of death in the world for those aged 15 to 24. And depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide. And if you look at the gender roles and gender disparities, this is a little, I think the latest update was 2017 for this. So they're still working on 2020 because, as you can imagine, I'll talk about that in a second with the COVID and everything. But suicide among males is 4 times higher than among females. And then females attempt suicide 3 times more often as males do. Males typically, the most common method of suicide used is firearms. As females is more of a poisoning. And females are actually more likely than males to have suicidal thoughts. So those are just a little bit of it. And again, I talked about the age disparities and how it's the second leading cause, between 15 to 24. And then also, I found this out as well, that suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the U.S. So it's crazy, guys. I've had my own battle with suicide. I think a lot of people have, and nobody wants to talk about it, of course, to be like, yeah, I was suicidal, because that's not like a cool thing to talk about, right? Like, yeah, girl, I was suicidal. Yeah. Like, who is talking about that? But I've had my own battle, and I'm not going to share it on this episode. I'll definitely share it on the next one. But I've been there. I've been in that weird, dark place where I'm like, you know what? I'm cool. I can be out and we good, So I've been in that weird space, and I understand, sometimes where people are at, but I wanted to make sure that if you're listening to this and you do have those suicidal thoughts, or you've thought about it, or you're thinking about doing it, that you hear from someone who is living in the aftermath of it, and just so you can get an understanding of what you're leaving behind and what could happen if you do choose to move forward in it. So, like I said, I didn't want this to be long. This is going to be short because I want to give him enough time to speak on that. But I wanted to give you guys some statistics. I wanted you guys to know, obviously, what we're going to be talking about. But as soon as we get back from this break, I will introduce him and we will talk more about it. This week's episode is sponsored by Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. Number one, it is free. That means no monthly subscriptions, no hidden fees. It is free 99. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. So you don't have to buy all this equipment that I decided to buy. You can do it right from your phone or computer. And Anchor will distribute your podcast for you. So it's so easy for me to upload an episode and it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many, many more. And you can actually make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. And let's get into the show. All right, everyone, we are back and I am super just excited and honored to have this next guest on. He is not only a friend of mine, but someone who I admire a lot in his journey and everything that he does. So I'll read a quick bio and then we'll get right into it. Brian Patrick is the founder and president of the Atlanta-based nonprofit Beyond Broken, Inc. Beyond Broken strives to normalize mental illness and eradicate the stigma around mental health. With depression, anxiety, and suicide rates increasing in America, Beyond Broken aims to provide support groups, doctor ratings, and low to no cost therapy to those who need it most in the Atlanta community. So without further ado, I would like to welcome my friend. I call him B, but we're going to call him Brian today. We're going to act accordingly, you know? Brian, I'm going to call you B. I was going to say I'm going to call you B throughout this interview. So
before we start, I want to say deep gratitude is owed to you for what you're doing with this show. Grief is a lonely mistress, and what you've done in your last season is you've reached out to people and let them know that they're not alone in that grief, and that it's not about getting through grief; it's about understanding it. And you're doing good work, so I appreciate all that you do, and it's a bigger honor for me to be on the show than for you to have.
Oh, B, don't get me emotional before we start. Dang, I get emotional up in here. Dang, but no, I really appreciate that. I mean, those are very kind words, and I really appreciate that because me and you have had the conversation about grief many a times, and I think the words, I love that, like a lonely mistress. It's intense. It's definitely intense, but we can all get through it if we just work through it together. So I really appreciate those kind words. So, I was telling my listeners right before we started, I didn't really want to get into a long story about it or anything, because I definitely wanted you to share your journey. But if you can just share, because obviously this episode we're talking about suicide because, as you know, I'm sure that you've seen, and as you said in your bio, it's increasing. They're increasing, especially with coronavirus, especially with, being isolated and all those things going on. So if you can just share kind of your journey with what happened with you.
Well, I was with a beautiful woman inside and out for 11 years. And throughout that 11 years, she dealt with depression and anxiety. Last year, it was like the stars had aligned for as negative as an experience as you can have. Depression, anxiety, misdiagnosis, missed medication, malpractice. A lot of things happened that led to my wife taking her life on March 3rd of this year. And I went from being a husband who was dealing with a wife with mental illness to a widower who was dealing with all that she left behind. And that journey over this past year has been one that has been illuminating. It's been at times emotionally crushing. At times it's been something that keeps me going. So it's been quite an experience, and it is the reason why we have the foundation, and she is the reason why I do what I do today.
I love it. So, again, I knew Brandy, and he was everything that he said about her. She's beautiful, sweet. Like, if you met her, she always had a smile on her face. So, like, definitely, I called her B2. So B&B over here. So she's definitely missed, and we loved her so much. And I think you touched on something that I just kind of wanted to dive into. You said, like, not you've turned from a husband to someone who was dealing with the mental illness, which we'll talk about in a second, but you said to the things that she's left behind, because I want to make sure that when people hear this episode, they understand the impact of what's left behind. And you always hear, like, oh, suicide is a selfish thing. And of course we can say that because we're here. So I just, if someone's listening and they're contemplating and they're thinking about it, I want them to understand the aftermath. This is basically called, like, the aftermath of suicide. And so that's why I think it was important for you to say everything that she's left behind. So if you can kind of touch on that and what you meant by that statement. So maybe someone who is listening, who may be contemplating, can understand what that aftermath looks like.
Of course. For me, and I can only speak expertly about my own experience, but for me, if Brandy was the sun, I was the earth. I revolved around her warmth, and she was so much a part of my life that she was actually my identity. If people, me, and other people who know me can tell you that I would much rather describe myself as Brandy's husband than anything else. And when she was gone, there's a lot of things that you don't really think about that happen when someone who's that important to your life is no longer there. When I talk about the things she left behind, it's not just the physical things that she left behind. You have to deal with closing out the final chapter of somebody's life financially. You have to deal with, you become the emotional lightning rod for every one of her friends and family that were affected by that. You leave behind the trauma of that. But on a day-to-day basis, what's been left behind is, when you're married, you have an ongoing conversation is what I call it. And now the conversation is over, and I wasn't done talking. So that's left behind. A future that we had planned, plan to have children. I went back to my office a couple months ago, and my computer was still up. The last thing that I was working on was budgeting out some stuff for a nanny and all that kind of stuff, because we've been talking about having a baby. Those things are left behind. There are these footprints on your life, when you're with somebody or when you're a part of a family, and when that person is gone, that void is hard to fill, so, she was a sister, and now her brothers have no sister. She was a caretaker to a lot of people, and now they don't have that care, she was a mentor to a lot of people at work. Now they don't have that direction. You never realize how important the very small things you do are until you're no longer there to do them. And so, there's a lifetime of things that she left behind that, nobody can fix and nobody can be. I can't be Brandy as much as I can try. I can't be the sister of Brandy's brother. I can't be the aunt to our nieces and nephews. I can't be the voice of reason in her tone. So there's a lot. There's a lot that comes with a person leaving the earth, and especially in the way that suicide does is so abrupt. Um, Everyone in your family spends the rest of their life trying to figure out, where do we go from here?
I think that's yeah, I mean all of those things. I mean, I was just writing some notes and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, like all of these things are I mean, like that emotional lightning rod for family and friends, like I can only imagine because I can imagine from my side of now kind of being the matriarch or being deemed the matriarch, even though I didn't want to, of the family, like when my mom passed. But I can imagine, like you said, like I cannot be Brandy, but you were the closest thing to Brandy. So now everybody's kind of looking to you and you're like, I don't know what to do in this situation because I'm not her. Um, and so I wanted to ask you that too, because I think the last statement that you said, do you or have you maybe felt that is there something I could have done? What did I do wrong? You know, that guilt factor that comes into it, especially with suicide. Even if someone, you know, wrote you a note or and said it's not your fault, like, do you have that guilt inside of you? And if you do, does it always stay with you? Has it gone away a little bit? And again, I know it hasn't been that long since she's passed away. So this may be, you know, obviously it's only been less than a year, you know?
At first, yes. I spent probably the first month retracing every day my day went like this. I would wake up, if I did sleep at all, I would wake up and I would relive March 3rd every single day. There are very big things that happened during that day that I could have changed. Very big things. And you go over them and then you think about the rest of that year and you go over those things. You know, you blame yourself and when we're talking about the emotional lightning rod, I'm not the only person. There are people calling me talking about what could they have done differently as if I could tell them, you know. But at the end of the day, it does subside. I don't think about those things as much as I used to, if at all, anymore. What I had to understand, at least with mental illness and suicide, is me and Brandy had talked about what would happen in the event that she died. Many times before she died, a lot of people don't know she attempted 4 times before she was successful. Most people. And so death was a conversation that was alive in our house often. And I knew that she didn't want to die. Mental illness took her life. Poor doctors took her life, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, you go through the motions. What could I have done differently? But then you realize that even if you had done something differently that day, could you have done everything perfect for the rest of your life? No. You have to grief is something that doesn't go away. And I tell people all the time now that grief is my passenger and I carry it for the rest of my life. But there are things that we can drop off along the way. And one of those things is the idea that these things are your fault. Not your fault. Life plays out the way life plays out. And unfortunately, it didn't play out the way that we wanted to for Brandy. But there's no one's fault. It's not Brandy's fault. It's not my fault. And you have to learn in the process of grief, there's a point where you need to forgive yourself. And once you do that, you can't go back and start, you know, putting more blame on yourself. You have to forgive yourself for the things that happened and what you could have changed and what you could not have changed. And only then can you know, really start to live within that grief.
That's good, B. That's good. Cause yeah, that forgive yourself is listen, because you can walk around and carry grief and be mad and I could have done this and I could have done that. And it's still, like you said, I think you made a valid point. Like you could have went back and changed March 3rd all day, but that doesn't mean March 4th something would have changed. March 5th something would have changed. Right.
You can't do that, you know. The thing I think about most of that day is I didn't have to go to work that day. The only reason I went to work the day that Brandy passed away was that I knew that Brandy was supposed to go to therapy and then she was supposed to go to her job for a couple of hours and I would be back home. I went to work because of caretaker fatigue. Her anxiety was so bad she couldn't get out of bed those days. And the weekend before, we had gone on a trip and she couldn't get out of bed. And I was so exhausted of taking care of Brandy that I needed to go to work just to have a couple of hours to myself. And I can't tell you how long it took me to forgive myself for going to work. But I would have had to go to work Sunday. I would have had to leave her alone one day. One day of her life, she would have had to be left alone. And then could I have blamed myself for that day if she had committed suicide? No. We are human beings, and you have to allow yourself to be human. And in that, you may make mistakes, and sometimes they may be costly, but you have to forgive yourself for what happened.
Yeah, no, that's true. And let's dive into that. I know we were talking about it earlier about, like you said, being a husband dealing with mental illness and that caretaker fatigue, because that is a real thing. I've been a caretaker twice now, and it is a very, very real thing. And so can you talk a little bit about that, of being a husband in dealing with someone who had mental illness, and what that looked like for you, what that looked like for her, and what that looked like for your relationship?
Absolutely. The first thing I will say is, if there are any caretakers out there, the first thing you need to do as soon as you get done listening to this, because you got to give Loryn her full spin. As soon as you get done listening to this episode, the first thing you need to do is get a piece of paper, get a pen, and write down, what do I need for me? Not for the person you're taking care of, but what do I need for me, so that I can continue to be a strong caretaker, and that I can reduce the chances of burnout. If I need a Tuesday at 12 o'clock for myself, take it. Please do. It's very important that you take care of yourself when you're trying to take care of other people. But to answer your question, Brandy's depression was cyclical. A lot of people don't know. To know Brandy, you gotta know her story. She was born in 1988 to two very young parents. Her dad was in the military, and when she was 2 years old, they were in Germany. Her dad climbed a light pole to try to get one of his drunken friends down from the light pole. Ended up electrocuting himself. He died. They went back to the United States, and her mom met this guy. They moved in with this guy. They had other children. Brandy was molested by this guy from the age of 5 until 16. She told her mother about it. Her mother said, basically, we can't move out of this house, so you're going to have to suck it up, take one for the team. And her mother, when she was 16, Brandy found her mother had committed suicide. She hung herself in the garage. Brandy came home from school, and she was the one who found her. So there have been pain and struggle throughout her entire life. And throughout the year, every year after that, her mother died in January 16th to be exact. Every year during the holidays, starting right around October, Brandy would get into a deep depression. So the entire time you've known Brandy Loryn, if you've ever seen her during the holidays, she was in deep depression. If you even got to see her, it was, a miracle that she was outside.
Yeah.
So that always happened every year. And, we would get through it by February. By her birthday in March, she would be perfectly fine, and we would have, a regular relationship. In 2018, I convinced her that maybe we should go back to see a therapist. She went to a therapist in 2019, and the therapist sent her to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist ended up prescribing loads of different medications that all changed Brandy's brain chemistry. Very strong medication. And they all had very strong side effects. We would take us 3 or 4 hours to talk about even just the side effects. But there was one drug that made her incredibly angry at everybody all the time. She had to walk on eggshells. There was one drug that one of the side effects is muted emotion. So she couldn't feel any other emotion other than anger and sadness. Couldn't feel love, happiness, and that's a hell of a drug right there that takes away from you. And what it did to our relationship is, for the last year of our marriage, I didn't have the same wife, but she was going through a lot and she needed me, but the relationship wasn't what it used to be. It wasn't the strong, loving relationship that we had because one person wasn't there, you know. And that was probably the hardest thing, you know, watching her go through it, but at the same time, having somebody right there next to you and still you feeling so alone because they are not themselves. And you just every day waking up hoping this is the day that, you know, I reach deep into this water and her hand is reaching back and I find my wife, you know. And so as a caretaker who was also a husband, it was very tough because you had a wife who didn't feel like your wife anymore, more of a roommate at times that you have to take care of. But you have to still have that love. You know what it's like taking care of a loved one.
Right.
And you got to dig deep into the wells of who you are and deep into the wells of that love. And, you know, every bit of the equity that you guys have built, you got to start pulling from because the day to day is just so hard. You know, all she could do at any point by this time last year was go to work and then come home, medicate herself, and then be basically knocked out all day. So, you know, the connection was gone, everything was gone, but here you are as a caretaker trying your best to make sure that, you know, this person is okay, but also your heart's breaking because this person is not who they used to be. So it was tough. It was very tough.
Yeah, I can imagine. So there's a couple things like that medication. Ugh, like, I just have such a love-hate relationship with it. Like, I get it. Like, you're trying to help, but then, like you said, the side effects are so bad. It's like, okay, so now we're treating the depression, but now she's angry, or now she doesn't care about anything else. So is it treating the depression? So God, it's just such a love-hate relationship. Like, it's supposed to be helping, but
I phoned the note. You know, I won't speak terribly of the medication because it wasn't the medications that was the problem. It was the person who was prescribing them and what they were doing.
Yeah.
So for most of the time, you're taking, you know, those medications that can actually change the chemistry of your brain. You're supposed to be on one medication for maybe 6 months. You know, they call it getting to a therapeutic level with the medication. You're supposed to be on those medications for a long time. And when you go back to your doctor and you're talking about the side effects, the doctor is not supposed to change the medication, but change the dosage and just play around with the dosage. Maybe even add a medication, but not change. Randy, in 1 year, was on 7 medications.
Oh my God.
Right. So in 1 year, she's on 7 medications. It was so bad that the medical examiner, the day that she died, when she came and brought me the pills, asked me was Brandy taking all of them, and I said, yeah. And they immediately subpoenaed her psychiatrist. Then the detective subpoenaed her psychiatrist too, because it's not normal for you to take that many medications over the course of 1 year, especially medications that are that strong. If you are with the doctor who's doing that and putting you on multiple medications, stop immediately. Go see a psychologist. Start working on cognitive behavioral therapy, especially if you're dealing with anxiety. Trust me, I'm not a doctor, so please, you know, take this with what it is. But from my experience, you don't need to be on multiple medications. Try to talk to a doctor about the care plan or the health plan that you're looking to do. What are we trying to accomplish with this medication? What are the side effects of this medication? If the side effects are unbearable for me, what do we do then? The last thing you want is for you to be at a therapeutic level with medication, and then we're talking about what do we do now, and you got to move on to the next thing and the next thing. So Talk to your doctor about the objectives. And if the objectives don't match what you want, because it's your life, the doctors are practicing medicine. They're not professionals ever. It's practice.
That's right.
So if the outcome and the objectives are not what you want for your life, tell them no. We'll try something else. We'll do something else. But the mistakes that we made, if we could go back and change things, is that for most of that year, we blindly trusted the doctors to do what they're supposed to do. And we didn't play our part in making sure that it was what we wanted.
Yeah. But like you said, you forgave yourself.
Exactly.
And, but I know you are looking at that doctor side eye, because there's a couple doctors that we have, had some medical malpractice issues with as well with my dad. So trust me, don't even get me started. So for someone who's listening and may have heard, obviously your story about being a caretaker and might have been like, see, it's too much for them to take care of me. That's why I gotta go. What do you say to that person who is like, yes, this is how I feel as a caretaker, but this is why you should not take your life?
There's a reason why they call it a caretaker. If I didn't care, I wouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if we talked about this or not, but the day before Brandy passed away, we were standing outside in our backyard. I remember it very vividly. It had just rained. We were standing outside with our dog in the backyard. And Brandy was apologizing to me. I asked her why. And she was like, because I make your life so hard and everything would just be so much easier if I wasn't here. And I told her right then and there, this mental illness stuff that we are dealing with, and it would be no different than if my wife had cancer. And I told her, I love you and I'm going to fight until the last breath on your side. It doesn't matter. And that was one of the last conversations that we had. People who devote their life to taking care of you, they don't do it because they have to. There's a lot of Newt Gingrich left his wife while she was dying of cancer, and moved on to the next person. There's a lot of people who don't really love you, who won't be there for you. But if there's a person who's there day in, day out, doing the work with you, winning the battles with you, losing the battles with you, crying with you, smiling with you, it's because they want to be there desperately. They wouldn't want to be anywhere else in the world. And I didn't want to be anywhere else in the world, whether it was good or bad. I didn't want to be with her. And so if there's somebody out there who's listening to this and thinking this is the reason why I should go, I'll tell you, every day of my life since Brandy died, it's been 263 days. Every one of those days I would trade for one more minute of her life. So do know that that's not a reason to leave this earth, because the person who's going to be hurt the most is that person that you think you're helping the most by being gone.
That is good. The person that you think you're helping the most is going to hurt the most. Wow. That was good, Brian. That was good. So I wanted to touch on something that you spoke on earlier of, again, with her passing, you said it's illuminating and crushing, but it also keeps me going. And I think that's the whole purpose of everything that I talk about, is that with grief is so tiring, it's so confusing, but it's so beautiful and so motivating and all of these other things. So can you touch on that a little bit? Because I feel like, like you said, it's been 263 days and, again, it doesn't get easier. You just adjust to it. But can you talk about kind of where you're at in the journey? Because I know there's like a thick of grief, and I don't know necessarily if you're there, like just me talking to you and knowing who you are and the things that you've done. So if you could just talk about where you're at in the grief journey, whether it's to the other side, whether you feel like it's, getting, I don't want to say to the end because there's never an end, right? But like this deeper part of it. So if you can just talk to me a little bit about where you are in the journey, and because I thought those words were interesting that you used.
Well, for starters, I think, and I was talking to my therapist about this, I think I have a different understanding of grief than a lot of people. A lot of people in this 263 days have been helpful. But what they want from me is to get to quote unquote the other side of grief. And I don't really think there is an other side of grief. There's a better understanding of it. My uncle lost his wife maybe 25 years ago. And the day that Brandy died, he called me and he kind of walked me through what to expect for the immediate and then really for the rest of my life. What do you expect? I asked him and said, when will this be okay? And he said to me, it will never be okay. And you will never be okay. You'll always have that, but you learn how to manage it. You learn how to manage that pain day to day.
Agreed.
And it becomes less of a crushing weight on you as you learn how to lift it. You learn how to carry it with you. And you make it, basically work for you. And so I can't honestly tell you where I am in the process because to me, it's a lifelong process. I can tell you where I'm not. I'm not in those beginning stages where it just seems like, when they first passed, this, it's like you got to tell yourself to breathe every second. And then you got to breathe every minute. And then you got to tell yourself, okay, you can make it through an hour. Now you can make it through 2 hours. Now you can make it through a day. Can you make it through 2 days? I make it just fine now, when the hardest part of it for me was, like I said earlier, I described myself as Brandy's husband. That's how people knew. Brandy's husband. That's Brandy and Brian. You never really said one name without the other. And that's how close we were, and so to me, the hardest part about grief has been creating or recreating my own identity, because my identity was so deeply ingrained in who we were, Brandy and Brian, that now not actively having her here to love had been a challenge, and that's kind of where foundation comes in. That's my love letter to Brandy. But, when it comes to the grieving process, I kind of feel like you go through the suffocating part of grief, and then you have to go through the acceptance part of grief. Mm-hmm. And then the rest of grief, really, I'm not speaking as a 20-year expert in it. I'm speaking as where I'm at. The rest of grief is learning how to proceed. And that's a process within itself, I just bought a new house and realized today I don't know a damn thing about decorating. and that's the kind of stuff where I would just look at Brandy and say, here's my credit card. Here's how much you can spend. Knock yourself out. I don't know anything about it. I got to learn how to do that. I had to learn how to love our dog because he was grieving too.
Yeah.
And you never realize pets grieve too.
Yeah.
And where's he at in the process? She was the one who spent time with him like that and played with him. I don't get on the ground and play. And neither. I'm too old for that. But here I am. I'm on the ground playing with a little dog. I'm walking this little dog. I'm in bed, little dog sleeping on my chest. All the things that he used to do with her, I'm now stepping and be. And so, it's a weird process. Grief and the acceptance phase, and then the moving on phase. It's a weird process, but where I'm at in that process is, just trying to rebuild and learn who I am right now and what I need, and how it is okay now that there is only me. It is okay now to find out who I am, what I want, and what is best for me and me alone.
No, that's good. That's good. So I actually talked about that on a whole episode about like that identity loss that happens when you are going through a grief, because you really do, like you said, you were Brandy's husband, and now it's like, okay, well, who is Brian without Brandy, right? And I think the beautiful thing about it, you made a good point. At the end of the day, I always tell people grief is not like beginning to end. That's just not how it works. It's a lifelong journey. It doesn't matter if somebody died 5 years ago. My mom died 5 years ago. The other day, I just randomly started crying, cleaning. Like, it's not that, but again, it's not that heavy monkey that's on my back when it first happened, but we're going into that holiday season. And so now, of course, this is when it starts, like you were speaking about Brandy. And so that's why I talked about it on my last episode. Like, this is when it starts getting real. This is when you start remembering things. This is when things start happening. And so I love how, you talked about really recreating who Brian is and knowing that it's okay. And I feel like it's beautiful because you can almost recreate who you want to be. Like, how many times in your life, I mean, you can, but like, how many times in your life can you really recreate who you are and nobody says anything about it? Nobody judges you. Nobody looks at you crazy because it's like, oh, well, he lost, his wife. So he can, whatever. Oh, she lost her mom or dad. So she can, whatever. So it's almost like, that part of it is like, well, I can be whoever I want to be because who I was rooted in insert the loss, whether it is losing someone to suicide or losing my parents to cancer or getting out of a divorce or losing a baby or whatever it is.
To me, it's one of the hardest parts is because, well, I had to learn how to, one, not care about what other people think.
Yeah.
The first one. Because how you grieve is different for every person, and, there are people who are grieving for Brandy in their own ways.
Yeah.
And they might not. I bought a car. So one, every time I look at that car, I kind of hate it, but it was the first purchase that I made after Brandy died. And it was, I like this car. I'm doing something for me. And I can't tell you how many people had something under their breath to say about it and how much it bothered me at first. And then I had to realize a couple things. One, they're not me. And I don't have to listen. Their opinion doesn't have to matter. I don't have to listen to it. And then two, they're grieving in their own ways, and I got to give them the space to do that. But with that, I got to take a step back. Like, one of the things that was hard for me when it was redesigning myself was getting rid of the people around me. Not in a negative way, but like taking a step back and saying, I can't even have a support group right now because I need non-biased support. So I need to take a step back and really think about what I need and then go do that, and the people who respect that, that's who I'm going to bring back into my support system. The people who don't, I love you, grieve your way. We'll talk later, So that's been the hardest part for me is just trying to redesign myself while also making sure to keep my distance from everybody else who has a problem with that.
Yeah.
Like you said, how often can you change without people having some sort of feeling about it? And even when your wife dies, I'm going to tell you, people have something to say when you change.
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, that's what happened with my dad. My dad started dating someone I think really shortly after my mom passed. And him and I had a conversation about it. I said, listen, nobody can tell you when too soon is too soon, and I wholeheartedly believe that. And I'm not saying that you're going to go out here and date. I'm just saying in general, like, I don't know how it feels to lose a spouse. So I can't tell you anything about what you should be doing. And I shouldn't be anyway. I mean, at the end of the day, if y'all haven't learned anything, everyone should mind their business. But anyways, sorry, guys.
Everyone should mind their business. But here was the biggest, and you actually told me this was coming at Brandy's funeral, but it was the biggest shock to me. It made me so mad. So Brandy's funeral was March 14th. Mm-hmm. The shutdown was March 17th, March 8th. So I went from, in a 2-week time span, losing my wife, burying her, well, having the funeral for her, to losing everybody around me.
Yeah.
And nobody, like nobody called, nobody showed up. Like it was a desert, basically. And it made me so mad because so many people were just not there when I felt like I needed them most. And what I learned over the period of time is that people are very uncomfortable with grief.
Yeah.
And even if they wanted to be there, they couldn't be there because they don't know how to just sit in it and just not have anything to say and just be there for a person.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you are in a situation where you got a person in grief, or you got a person who, just recently lost somebody, hell, it doesn't even have to be recent. Reach out. Like, they may not even need you, but I guarantee they need something. And it's okay to not have anything to say. And it's okay to feel awkward about it. Grief is not something that people want to be in.
Yeah.
Pain is not something that people want to be in, but being in grief and being alone is tough.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you are out there, people, and there's somebody who is going through something, don't let them go through it by themselves.
It's crazy. And again, if you're listening and you're contemplating, taking your life, first of all, I hope that you know that you're valued, you're loved, and you are appreciated. And everyone who is around you, whether they're a caretaker or not, they want to be there for you and they love you. But I hope you're just listening to the aftermath of it. And, me and Brian are having candid conversations because that's what we do. But these are things that are true. These are things that happen. And, you might be like, oh, well, they're laughing and stuff. But, that doesn't mean that when we get off this podcast, he may go cry and I may go cry, right? Like, these are things that are true and that are what happened. And so I want to talk about, before we get off here, I want to talk about what you're doing now with Beyond Broken Ink. I absolutely love it. And I love the Reach Out Wednesday. So if you can talk a little bit about that, because like I said, mind your business, but also reach out to those who need to be reached out to. Because I actually just lost a colleague to suicide, and he was someone who smiled all the time and was so nice and so happy. So it was a shock, to hear that he had committed suicide. He had 2 kids, and it was just crazy. And so I think that Reach Out Wednesday, I love it every time that you do it. But if you can just talk about Beyond Broken Ink and things that you're doing and what you plan on doing moving forward with it.
Of course. So the smallest thing, it might even turn out to be the biggest thing that we were doing with Beyond Broken, is Reach Out Wednesday. Like you said, the people who lose their lives to suicide and the people who are depressed are the best actors. And literally, if you look at some of the best actual actors, they deal with depression. People with depression are good at hiding things. And if you're not reaching out, they're not reaching out to you for help. The one thing that all these people need is to feel secure and safe in telling people when they're not feeling well. We all get into this habit, whether you have mental illness or not. You go to work and people ask you in the morning, how are you doing? How often do you tell the truth? You don't. Because you don't feel comfortable with that person telling them, actually, I'm not doing well at all. But if there's consistent reaching out, and there's a person who consistently calls you every Wednesday or whatever day it might be, you get comfortable with that person, and maybe you tell that person something's not right. Or when a person is reaching out and talking to you over and over again, they can start to get the sense of, I talked to this person for 52 straight Wednesdays, and on this Wednesday something didn't feel right. I'm gonna go visit. I'm gonna do something. So the first thing is Reach Out Wednesday. If you're not doing it, they don't even have to be somebody who you feel is going through something. Just, open up your contact list, do a quick scroll through and just touch one number and call that number. See what they're doing, So that's one thing that we've been pushing for the last 8-9 months. But with the foundation itself, we're right now in the process of working with a couple of people from Emory, as well as a few other places, to set up different support groups and different therapy sessions that you can access. It's not up and running yet, but it will be in 2021. We'll have a survivors of suicide support group, which I hope one day is completely empty and no one ever has to go there. We'll have a support group for people who have attempted suicide before. We'll also have therapy and therapy sessions for people who can't afford to do it any other way, people who don't have insurance or people who financially just don't have the copay. You know, my copay every week when I go to therapy is $50. There's a lot of people who can't afford to do that, spend $200 a month on therapy, you know. So we'll have needs-based therapy as well. The goal in it all together isn't just to help the Atlanta community. That's where we start. But the goal is to get bigger and bigger and bigger and really try to erase that stigma that's around mental health. It hasn't been until this year, to be honest with you, that people are even comfortable saying it. Like, have you heard mental illness as much as you've heard it in 2020?
Not at all.
This is the first time that people have been talking about it, and people have been talking about suicide. And here's the thing that kind of burns me up on the inside. For the last 25 years, suicide has been the number 10 leading cause of death in the United States. And we don't talk about it. It's the number 4 leading cause of death between people 18 and 34. The 4th leading cause, we don't talk about it. When Brandy needed to go to, and for all you people, Brandy's my wife, when Brandy needed to go to it was like this medical facility in January after she had checked herself into a mental hospital when she needed to go to another facility. The facility was $40,000 a week.
Jesus.
Yeah. I make good money. I don't make $40,000 a week money. And so I had to choose it's one of the most heartbreaking things in my life. I had to choose, what do we do? And the answer was, we literally cannot afford for you to spend several months in a place that costs a person's salary a week, you know? So, what we aim to do with this thing is to get it to a level where we can build those facilities and we can have those things, and it doesn't cost that much, you know? People shouldn't have to choose eating or living, you know? And that's where we are right now with mental health, because it's such a stigmatized thing that not even the government spends enough money on it. Last year, the government spent $500 million on research for depression and anxiety that lead to suicide. They spent $690 million on just breast cancer. With that kind of money, we should, 1, be finding a cure to things, but 2, if we can spend $690 million on a type of cancer, that's not all cancer research, that's a type of cancer, we can spend more money on mental illness.
Agreed.
There are different types of mental illness. That's $500 million for everything, right? And that was $690 million for one type. We've got to do better as a society if this is the number 10 killer of all the people in this society and the number 4 of our young people. And that's not even to get started about our young people of color.
Okay.
Who seen their rates skyrocket and nobody cares. Black men are committing suicide at higher and higher and higher rates. Mm-hmm. Black women are attempting suicide at higher and higher and higher rates. And it's a tragedy that if we don't stop now, if you think COVID is the tragedy of 2020, let's talk about 2025 and how many people of color that we lost in this community from this.
I didn't know that it was a number 4, and I didn't know it was a number 10. I just know how important it is to me and mental health. And I was sharing with some friends, like, even when I started this whole grief journey, like, I want to eventually, and this is something, you know, in the future, who knows what God has planned, but I really want some type of, like, how they have maternity leave. I think the grief and bereavement leave needs to be longer, because I don't know what 3 days is going to do for anybody, but I promise it did nothing for me. So, you know, and then some companies do a week, and, you know, there needs to be more time and there needs to be more resources during that bereavement leave, that you have someone there that you can go and speak to a therapist. And I'm not talking about like that, you know, the therapy that you do through work, because sometimes I feel like they do not, just don't even get me started. But
we need to erase the stigma, because the next step in it. So the foundation originally started in February before Brandy died. Brandy had a list of 10 things she wanted to accomplish in her life. And one of them was this foundation. And so originally last year, I did all the IRS stuff. I started doing it as her birthday present for March to tell her I've got the foundation up. Now let's raise a little bit of money every year for this. So it started in that time, right? But, it's one foundation trying to erase all this stigma. The next thing that we always wanted to do was one of us, I'm pointing at myself when I say this, one of us is going to run for office. Because until we get people who understand mental illness, we get people who understand that it's not just the 10th leading cause of death. Think of it this way. It's the 10th leading cause of death, which means that 48,000 people every single year in America are going through something so painful, so bad, so defeating, that they feel the only thing they can do is take their life. The other 9 things that kill people, these people kill themselves. And so until you have somebody who understands that that's what's at stake, it will be 10, then it will be 9, then it will be 8, then it will be 7. It will get worse and worse and worse. So we need people who understand that to make the laws that can actually help people. Because that $40,000, I'm not going to say his name because I don't want to do that to them. That was after insurance. So we need people in office who understand that this is just as important as everything else.
Y'all heard that. He's going up for office. What you doing, a Kanye 2020? But no, that is so true. Because, that whole, God, I'm like, this 3-day thing. And I think you're right. Like, until people understand the importance of it, which my friend and I were laughing about the other day. She said, if it's one thing that I know about you, is that you are very serious about your mental health, to the fact that I quit my job because I felt like my mental health was being tried. So if I feel like my mental health is being tried, I'm going to quit. Like, it's just, because if something ever happens to me, all y'all are going to do is replace me. And that's just, how I feel about it. But that's a whole nother episode for a whole nother day. But Brian, this has been absolutely phenomenal. I think that you have touched someone who is listening. And I just appreciate you so much for being here, being open, being candid, being honest and transparent to show the aftermath of it. Because somebody may be listening and contemplating, especially again during this seasonal grief, this season that's happening, of taking their own life. And I just thank you for being here and talking about that aftermath. And although, yes, we may have laughed and said whatever, again, this is a lot of work that Brian and I, we talk about therapy all the time. Like, my therapist now, woo, let me tell you something, that girl there, good one, and Brian, he's like, hey, I need a new therapist. And I've sent him recommendations. Like, this is a lot of work that we've had to go through and still are going through. Like, it doesn't, it never stops. It's always constantly working on yourself. And like you said, like removing people, adding people, deciding what you want to do. And so I'm just thankful that you were here. So I just want to thank you again. How can people get in contact with you, learn more about Beyond Broken, learn more about you? If you can just share some of your information of where they can find you at.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me. Like I said at the beginning, you're doing great work. And it needs to continue. This goes a long way to helping with a lot of people's grief. So thank you. And then to those out there, if you are listening, who are thinking about committing and completing suicide, I would say, 1, you are valued, but 2, if you're thinking about it, and you have a plan, and you have loved ones, share your plan. Share your plan. They need to know that you've got those things going on, and even if they couldn't stop you, they need to know. We need to know these things. So share your plan. Have conversations. Don't let your leaving this earth be a surprise to anybody. At least that. The foundation's Instagram, where you can find them, is Beyond Broken Project. You can also go to beyondbrokenproject.org and go there. And once we get the therapy session set up and the group session set up, you can join there. We're working on our doctor ratings right now. So if there's a therapist or there's a psychiatrist that you're interested in, we can give you ratings on how well they actually do treat their patients. So if you don't follow me, you follow Beyond Broken. Still follow somebody. NAMI's a great, the North American Mental Illness Alliance, or whatever. They're great. There's a lot of places out there where you can donate, you can help, you could be changing and saving someone's life. So, please don't end this podcast and think that you've done your part. We all need to do more. And if there's anything that you can do, if there's any dollar that you have sitting around in your car that you could donate, go donate it to a cause that can help somebody.
I love it. I love it. Well, B, Brian, Mr. Patrick, thank you again. I know all the names. Thank you again for being here and sharing your story. I truly appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate you too, Loryn. Thank you.
That was so good. I hope that hearing Brian's story and the aftermath of losing such a dear friend of mine, Brandy, I hope that helps someone who may be listening, who may be thinking about ending their own life, or someone who is listening and may say, hey, I might need to reach out to somebody. So I just wanted to do a few things. I didn't want this to be super long. I really wanted to focus on Brian and his story and, kind of his aftermath of it, because like I told you guys earlier, there'll be a part 2 to this and I guess they call it an attempted survivor, I believe is what it's called. So someone who was attempted to commit suicide and they survived and just their journey. And so a couple of things that he touched on that I thought were important to bring back up is, about that caretaker, or you feeling like you're being a burden, or that it would just be easier if you weren't here because then people wouldn't be tired. That's just not true. Because the thing that he said that I thought was really great is the person that you think you're helping the most, you're actually hurting the most. So don't ever feel like you're a burden to people. I've had to go through that myself, of feeling like that I was being a burden to my friends and I just didn't want to be that person. And so I had my own thoughts. I'm not going to sit here and lie, and I'll share with you all my story on the next episode, but of just, well, if I wasn't here, this would be easier. And if I wasn't, doing this, and I wouldn't be a burden. So don't ever feel that way, because again, like you said, that a caretaker is someone who desperately wants to care for you and spend time with you and see you just be your best self. I was a caretaker for my dad and my mom, and I wouldn't change it for the world. Like literally, I tell people all the time, the last 6 months of my dad's life, I was there with him day in, day out, and it was exhausting. I'm not going to lie, but it was also something that I hold on to now, that I got to literally spend so much time with him in the last 6 months. And I would take anything to go back and argue with my dad about fluffing up his pillow or whatever crazy other thing that he asked me to do than him not be here. So don't ever feel like you being a burden on somebody would make it easier, because the person that you're like, okay, well, if I wasn't here, this would help them, it's going to hurt them the most. I can promise you that. And another thing I want to say is it's okay to get help. I know that there's such a stigma, and as he said, around mental health, there's nothing wrong with going to therapy. There's nothing wrong with going to talk to somebody. I know a lot of times I will say in even the Black community, well, really in the Black community, it's always like, oh, we don't go to no therapist. We ain't crazy. And you don't have to be crazy to go to therapy. And that word, like, what is crazy, right? So therapy, and I had this conversation with a friend the other day. Therapy is not something you just go to when everything's all bad or when you feel like something's bad. A lot of my friends say they just go to therapy once a quarter to do a check-in, like with their husband or with their wife, like, just to say like, hey, we're on the right path, but we just want to make sure we're using the tools properly. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you feel like something is wrong, or you can't get out, or you're spiraling, like, go get help. It's fine. It doesn't matter if no one else around you is doing it. It doesn't matter if everybody around you thinks you're crazy if you're doing it. What is crazy is insanity, I guess they say, is doing the same thing over and over and expecting the same results. And that's literally what's happening if you don't go get that help. And I know, like Brian said, therapy can be expensive. So I'm going to put his site up there, and then I'm going to put some other resources up there for you guys to be able to help hopefully get some therapy at an affordable rate. I know if you have insurance, a lot of times they'll pay for it, or then they have some other I know they have a county services here that you can get therapy and things. So whatever needs to happen, guys, if you feel you need to get help, go get help. It's okay. It's totally fine. You're not crazy. Nothing is wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with going to get therapy. I'm in therapy now. And I'm not like in a terrible place. I'm not about to go jump off a bridge. Like I'm not in that space, but I just need something and someone to help me unlock the tools inside of me so I can continue to live in the best way that I know how. And then the last thing is, when he was talking about the Beyond Broken organization, when he was talking about reaching out. So if you're listening to this and you're like, well, I'm not suicidal, but again, it's not even about being suicidal. It's just reaching out to someone because like I shared is I lost a colleague or an old colleague of mine. And he was someone who was always smiling, always happy, loved his kids, loved his wife. And so to hear that he passed away, I was flabbergasted. And I was like, what do you, huh? No, I don't even know what that means. Right. Because that's like, he was always happy and he was always nice, but you never know. My friend and I talked about, we felt like he was silently battling and he had to go through it alone. So reach out to somebody, guys. A big thing that I do. I will literally text my friends and be like, hey, mental health check. If I haven't talked to them in a long time, like just reach out because you never know you're reaching out and saying, hey, or literally just sending a text and saying, hey, just doing a mental health check. You never know what that can do to somebody or what that can mean for them. So just reach out. I know we get so caught up in our lives. And I think if Corona hasn't taught us anything, it's that, it's to what's important. And so reaching out, and again, it doesn't have to be a drawn out conversation. Just say, hey, just checking in. Don't say, hey, how are you doing? And there's nothing wrong with that either. Let me be clear. But, like Brian said, people will be like, I'm good. How are you? No, just say, hey, doing a mental health check. How are you really feeling? Just want you to like really dig down deep and tell me how you're really feeling. And they may be good, but they may not be good, But if you're reaching out, like you said, every Wednesday and so one Wednesday something's wrong, now you have a better understanding and maybe you can help and give them the resources that they need. So those are just a few things, guys. And I just, if you're listening to this and you are contemplating suicide, I want you to know 3 things. Number 1, I want you to know that you are valued. And you may not feel like that. You may feel like everything around you is falling to pieces, or you may feel like that no one cares, or you're trying hard and no one sees you. I see you. I see you. I value you. And the second thing that I want to tell you is that you're a fighter. I know you may feel like that you're drowning and you can't get out, or that you can't breathe, or whatever feeling that you're having. You're a fighter and you can get through that. And once you fight through it and get to that other side, that trophy is going to be awaiting you. And the third thing that I want to tell you is that I love you. And you're probably like, girl, you don't know me to love me. It doesn't matter. I just want you to know that I love you. And you may have not heard that in a long time, or you may have heard it and it felt empty. But I hope that you're hearing it, that is coming from the deepest part of my heart, that I love you and that you're valued and you matter and you're a fighter and that you can get through anything. And I've been there. I've been in that dark corner. I've been in that dark corner and feel like I can't get out. And I'm like, I'm just going to stay in this dark corner. It's fine. And nobody will care. Nobody will know. But that's not true. It's not true. I had a great support system that told me I mattered, that I'm valued, that I'm loved. I went to therapy and I had to work through those things. And so I want you to know that I've been in that dark corner with you. And when I tell you you can come out of that dark corner, you can walk out of that dark corner, leave it behind. And I'm not saying that life is easy or it's going to get easier for you. What I'm saying is that you're a fighter and you're going to fight through life, and you're not going to always have to fight all the time, but you just may have to fight in this moment. And I want you to give it all the effort that you can and fight to your hardest, and know at the other side, I'm going to be there with my arms wide open. Because you can imagine my arms wide open, just saying, I love you. And, I'm so happy and I'm so proud of your journey. And I'm so proud of the person that you've become and that you're becoming, and that the person that you are, and you're valued. You matter. And I love you to the max. I really, really do. So as you're going through the journey, as you're trying to figure it out, I just want you to know that you have to be kind to yourself. Or as I always say, give yourself grace and be kind to yourself, because if no one will, I said it wrong. Because if you don't, no one will, guys. But I also wanted to give you a quick National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number. So if you ever feel like, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, you don't have anyone to talk to, please call this number. This is a US number, but I am going to put in my show notes some international information as well, because I know we have some international listeners. So I will put that in the show notes as well. But if you are in the US and you feel like you want to talk to somebody, please call 1-800-273-8255. Again, 1-800-273-8255. But as I always say, I love you guys. Thank you so much for listening to another week's episode of This Too Shall Suck podcast, where we talk about the real of grief, the whole grief, and nothing but the grief. This episode was produced by Mike Sick, and our original music is produced by Jimmy Samaj. You can follow me on social media on Instagram at TTSSPod, and you can visit my website at thistooshallsuckpodcast.com. Also, feel free to send me an email and let me know what you thought about this episode. Let me know what you thought about Brian, and hopefully, if you heard something, it helped you change your mind. I would love to hear it. You can just shoot me an email at hello@thistooshallsuckpodcast.com. Wherever you are listening, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe, and share this podcast with someone you think it could help. As always, I love you guys. I'm sending you love and light in your life because you deserve it. I'll see you on the next episode. Mwah.